Senator Myrie, thanks for being on New York Now this week.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So last week, the legislature passed a series of voting reforms. You're the chair of the Elections Committee, so we saw automatic voter registration pass, absentee ballot voting for the general election because of COVID-19. And obviously, there was just this whole package. Not too many, but you obviously made some changes last week. Tell me, if I'm a voter, how this is going to change my experience when I go to the polls or as I'm getting ready to go to the polls.
We saw an increase of about 1 million in absentee ballot requests from the presidential primary in 2016. There were about 1.7 million absentee ballots requested. And so what we saw, the scope of our democracy was larger and under a compressed timeline. And so there were an increase in participation, but there were also some problems. And what we did last week was an attempt to try to solve some of those problems ahead of what will be an even bigger turnout in November. So if you're a voter and you sent in your ballot, but for some reason the post office did not postmark it, if it has gotten there by the day after election, regardless of whether it has a postmark, your ballot will be counted. If you're a voter and you were voting for the first time by absentee and you left off a signature or you put it in the wrong place or you didn't seal the envelope correctly, those technicalities under the old law would have discarded your ballot. You would be disenfranchised. One of the bills that we passed last week would say, we are going to give you notice if you have any sort of deficiency and allow you to cure that deficiency so that your ballot could count. Of course, automatic voter registration for the many folks in the state who are eligible to be registered but who have not. This is a bill that really moves the ball forward. Your interactions with state agencies will now automatically enroll you if you are eligible to vote. And so these are first steps. We will be holding a hearing on August 11th to see what more we can do. But I think we made some strides last week.
Right. The primary election in June, I think you and I can both agree that it did not go as well as everybody had hoped. Some people, as you said, their absentee ballots never got to them until a few days after the election, so they couldn't vote. And then other people, they sent their absentee ballots in, and like you said, they couldn't be counted because they were just scrapped. So you had that bill that you mentioned that would allow voters to cure those absentee ballots. And you mentioned the hearings. I'm curious, what are you going to be looking at in the hearings, and what do you expect to come out of them? What people will be testifying to give you some insight as to what happened?
Well, I think you hit it right on the head. There were a lot of problems that some we could have anticipated and others which we could not have. This is the first time that we were voting largely by mail. We have no idea where this pandemic is going to be in November. Hopefully we are on the other side of the curve, but if there's a resurgence, we'll see even greater participation by absentee balloting. And so our hearing is meant to examine what further steps we could take, what we can do, for instance, with our relationship with the United States Post Service. There are going to be increased demands on post offices all over New York and, of course, across the country, but we need them to work in conjunction with our local boards of elections. We saw a disconnect, and there's an opportunity for us to fix that ahead of November's election. And there were also voter experiences at the polls that were unsatisfactory. There are folks who received misinformation, folks who were prevented from voting, people who, due to delay, stepped off of the lines because they had to go do something else. And so we're going to be hearing from voters, we're going to be hearing from local boards of elections, we're going to be hearing from community organizations, really to get the full scope of some of the problems and hopefully work out some solutions.
So you obviously had the bills that were passed last week. You have the hearing coming up, and the legislature's already done a lot on voting reform over the past year, over the past 2 years. I'm wondering if, as elections chair, you see anything in the future that you really want to tackle. Any issues that really haven't been widely considered by the legislature that could spur voting and spur voting participation, because as you and I both know, in New York, I think the voting rate is below, voter participation rate is below 50%. And you have to think, like, how can we get these people to the polls?
That's right. I like to say that my job as the elections chair is to take New York from worst to first. And one of the areas in which we are the worst is in voter participation. And there are a number of reasons for that, but I think we have some solutions on the table that we can push forward. In the Senate, we passed online voter registration for the city of New York that is still awaiting passage in the other house. And so hopefully we can get that done in the future so that we can make the registration process as easy as possible. I've also introduced the New York Voting Rights Act. We held a hearing on that right before COVID on March 3rd, which would put into place protections that the Federal Voting Rights Act does not. As many people know, in 2013, the United States Supreme Court removed the gut of that act that protected voter suppression and intimidation. And so what we would like to do is to see that done on the state level. In fact, we will be renaming the New York Voting Rights Act the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act of New York, because that's what he died for, that's what he bled for, that's what he fought for his entire life. And we think it's a great way to honor him, not just in name, but in substance.
All right, we'll keep an eye on it. Senator Zellner Myrie, thank you so much for being on New York Now this week.
Thanks again for having me.